V,
Hey,
no post pod today. This is kind of the post pod.
we get the day off.
Yeah. We're talking about intent-based marketing. We've kind of been back and forth on this a lot in various ways in the various podcasts that we've done. We talked a lot about branding. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we also talked about during there is this epiphany you've had around some of the branding, or an awakening, let's call it.
An awakening.
Woke. Yeah.
I'm so woke now. Watch out.
Yeah, around branding. But for a lot of the time that you and I work together, we spend a lot of time on intent. And so it's a really important part of marketing. So we're talking about that today because there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, and I'm actually happy we're taking the time to talk about this because it may seem or may feel like maybe not collectively we're poo-pooing on this idea of like performance-based marketing is, you know, it's not just about that. But I agree with you. I think there's a lot of tactics and strategies that have really come from the performance side that are extremely valuable, even in the context of brands. So I think intent-based is one of those where it can actually transcend a lot of the tactics that we deploy as marketers.
Yeah. There was a study I saw that they interviewed a whole bunch of B2B marketing leaders, and about 3/4 of them are using buyer intent to inform their sales marketing strategy. And then a whole bunch more are thinking about using it, even investing more in the coming future. So it's definitely, you know, when you're talking about having to deliver short-term results, this is where you go, right?
100%. I think it's one of the unique, toolkits, if you will, that a marketer has at the end of the day that can kind of provide and showcase a lot of value in a short amount of time. Obviously, it's how you package it and how you sell the story, I think, is the bigger nuance at times. Yeah. I think it's unfortunate that it's only kind of, I think the right way to put this is it's almost like it's only attributed from a performance marketing perspective. But personally, I've even deployed it against larger, even brand campaigns. I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Yeah. But it's so versatile to kind of use this lens. I think it's important that we just kind of look at it as a marketing tactic versus it just being siloed as a performance marketing tactic. Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into this.
Yeah.
When we talk about intent-based marketing or performance marketing, is another way to say it. How would you define intent-based marketing?
Yeah, like in its simplest form, it's really kind of thinking about, you know, creating marketing campaigns or directing marketing campaigns for consumers whose online behavior shows purchase intent. And it's honestly looking at it just through that lens. And there's significant channels out there that you can look at that really kind of give you those primary signals that you can kind of use and model and et cetera. So it's identifying intent, looking at the digital footprint that consumers leave that show purchase intent is the way I would define it.
So I know one of the most common, like one of the simplest ways that I would think of doing it when you and I work together would have been like somebody comes to your product level page and adds something to cart, but doesn't buy, right? Yeah. So that would be an intent signal that you could use then to build out retargeting campaigns, let's say.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. Yeah. No, exactly. That's a great example. We'll talk about channels a little bit earlier, but obviously the first one that always comes to mind is something like search. People are using keywords, right? And they're telling you exactly blue sweaters, Zappos, blue sweaters, whatever, like it doesn't matter, but showing that you're looking for a blue sweater and that shows intent. And that's where, you know, a lot of organizations that are selling blue sweaters can attack those keyword strategies and try to make sure that they're driving driving traffic to their product pages.
Yeah. When I worked in broadcast media a while back, when I first started in sales and marketing, we used to have a message like the right message, the right people at the right time. And so is intent marketing kind of just, is it the same as that in sentiment, or is it sort of a bit more nuanced?
No, I would agree in a generalist, from a generalist perspective, that it is quite similar. I know we had a common boss that would say, you know, the right message, the right time, constantly, right? And it's the only way you know that is, well, who's actually identifying intent? So that's where you target. But first, honestly, when you think about it, if it's the advantages. It's really kind of enables you to just concentrate on the right prospects and engage them when they're probably most likely to want to make a purchase decision. And obviously, every different product is going to be a little bit different, and there are nuances, but it's really kind of looking at it through that lens. I also think it's important that, intent marketing campaigns or strategies really empower organizations to maximize their purchases by boosting higher conversions. Because at the end of the day, we really sometimes run into this age-old problem where budget is finite. Like, we don't have these endless budgets. So it really kind of gives you that opportunity, and especially the way that you're either data modeling, understanding like your purchase behaviors, you have an opportunity to kind of really, really accelerate and look at, hey, where's the highest conversions coming from, or what data sources are coming from. So that's the real advantage of kind of using that intent lens across your campaigns.
Yeah, interesting, because I remember, we used to, or at least I was making an argument at some point where you'd say, like, if you could prove a ROAS of whatever, and it ended up being profitable for your organization, why would you ever cap your budget?
Yeah.
Right? Because you're looking at intent, and then you would have, in theory, every dollar you're putting in is spitting out, let's say, $4 back, and let's say your profitability is 50%. That means there's $1 left over that you just made from that. So, in some sense, like, I think it's kind of an interesting model. Like, if you could figure out and you could deduplicate the attribution to each individual channel. Yeah.
They don't make it easy for you to do that.
No.
And I'm going to say, I don't know if this is controversial or not, but I would say that even the idea that consumer intent or that lens is actually even more powerful than doing demographic targeting.
Yeah.
Because, at the end of the day, it's the signals it's the behavior that you're actually, that these people or these consumers or these profiles are actually showcasing versus, trying to look at a demographic where it could be, I've looked through my Google profile and some of it's accurate, other isn't. And it's just a bucket that they've put me in. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting to kind of think about intent more than just a targeting strategy. It is likely more of an enabler of really powerful outcomes from messages that you have in market.
Okay, so let's talk about we've talked about a little bit of the advantages of intent marketing, but what are the sources that you can get intent marketing or intent data from? We talked about your own website as an example, which would be considered first party.
So if you think about the intent sources, it really comes down to, I guess there's like 7 you can really think about, right? You have your search engines, and let's say Google for that case, your site data, your offsite web activity. So this is everything that's happening away from. So that's where you're looking at your third-party data sources. Point of sale. So if you have bricks and mortar, point of sale is another great data source. Then you also have things like your CRM, social data, social listening, and even content consumption, which is also usually syndicated externally. But it really comes down to the idea of your first-party data, right? Which there's also like a deep behavioral data element there too, but there's third-party data as well. And I don't know if you've come across this as well, but there's this zero-party data that is becoming extremely more and more important now. And that's the idea that you're enabling your consumer, and say, for lack of a better term, and they're providing information about themselves to you. So think about like, email data, right? So you're setting up your preferences. Well, that's one part of it, but it also can be like how people are setting up their cookies now. That is zero-party data because it's a user-led data point that they're being prompted to provide you with. And that's becoming increasingly important to use those pillars as well to kind of, model targeting strategies against.
I'm not that familiar with zero party data, actually.
Yeah.
So
It's been like the last 4 years. I think it's really started becoming a lot more prominent in a lot of strategies. I know I personally used it, working at my previous role in the airline industry, where we're trying to think about new ways to kind of elicit more of that prompted data points. There's other struggles there. You need to have really strong MarTech enabled to do so. But obviously, if making a recommendation, like you start with honestly your email data, your CRM data is kind of being that starting point. Like, how can you kind of give more personalization, if you will, or how can you get more data points from your users at that point? But
there's my first job ever was in pharma. And so there was this, I remember we had a training session with our manager at one point, and hang on with me on this story.
No, go.
Yeah,
I got you.
I'll connect it to what we're talking about here in a second. But we used to drop off samples at doctors' offices.
Yeah.
So I was a guy carrying the bag, and then in my bag was samples, and I go up and see the doctor and go, hey, I'll take whatever. And I drop a message, right time, right place, right person, that kind of thing. Of, hey, there's this patient in your room that looks like they could qualify for this. Consider using that product for that person when they come in.
Right.
Sure. Let's, but you never really knew whether or not they were buying or writing the prescription.
Right.
But he would sign off or she would sign off on the script to give you so that they could hand over the samples. So anyway, you go in, you leave, let's say 10 boxes of samples.
Right.
Come back 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, samples are gone. The manager at the time was like, so what does that mean? And then all of us are like, well, because, they used it for that patient, or they did this, or they did that.
Yeah.
And I remember this one guy goes, it means they're gone. And he's like, right. You don't know what it means. It just means they're gone.
They're not there.
They're not there. And so I think about that a lot when it comes to data, digital data, because you can interpret it a lot of different ways.
This is true.
But sometimes activity doesn't necessarily mean intent or interest. And so I guess my question would be for you.
This is a great point.
Is there a way to separate just digital activity from actual buying signals?
Well, it comes down. Well, let's
this is a little softball for you.
There's a great softball there, man. I think I'm just going to swing and miss this one. But no, I think, well, first of all, you kind of think about it in saying like, well, how do you analyze the user behavior first, right? So that when you're looking at, say, an activity on your web app on a website or your app, you can then identify patterns that indicate likely, intent to purchase. So for example, I think you used the example earlier, but someone visits a product page, adds a product to cart, and starts a checkout process. I would argue that is a pretty strong signal of intent that they're looking to make a purchase, right? Right. Now, you can also use that lens and understand, like, what does that buying journey look like? And, there's a lot of tools out there that you can do that. You can lean on Google. You can, Adobe has their own version of that as well. But then it's also taking and looking at it through almost like a advanced analytics perspective as well, because those can help you differentiate between passive digital activity and active buying signals. So for example, when you're thinking about machine learning algorithms to identify patterns in user behavior that indicate buying intent. So, when, the Googles are telling you, just let the algorithm do a thing. Technically, those algorithms are able to kind of detect between some of that activity. So what they're identifying as passive versus what they're actively looking at as buying signals. And then finally, it's kind of rudimentary, but it's honestly like, look at conversion rates. Yeah. Because like by analyzing your conversion rates, I think you get a really high indication of what is now a digital activity that's leading to sales versus say something that's just, passively coming across the website looking for information.
It's interesting you're talking about intent and using the algorithms. So I did a project not long ago, but on HubSpot looking at essentially buying intent, or what we interpret to be buying intent in terms of scoring a lead. So interestingly, like, you can set up HubSpot and other tools like that and assign scores for different things. Like, I'm going to give somebody points for having visited our website, points for downloading a document, points for watching a video, points for staying on the page X length of time, points for opening emails, all these things. So you can give points, and then you can assign a score. So then in a way and then negative points for not having done things. So once somebody's score hits a threshold, they can become an intent lead or an MQL. And then that is an indicator for you to do some other activity and follow up. So there's that. And so you create this scoring system. Let's say it's, 100, 200, whatever the score is. So then that becomes part of your pipeline. We did a comparison of that versus HubSpot's AI-based intent scoring thing. And it scored everybody, like what we would have scored, say 100, they scored a 1 or a -1. There was almost no variability there.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And they weren't counting things like all the things that we were counting. What they were trying to figure out is, did somebody buy or not? And so in a B2B sense, it's harder probably, unless it's like, and it's funny because B2B isn't actually B2B. Like, it's so much, and I mean that as a general sense. Like, if you could be B2B, but let's say, like, we use Riverside to record. Riverside is a B2B tool. It doesn't, or a B2C tool. It doesn't necessarily need to be only business to business. So you can buy online, you can have an online conversion. What I meant by B2B is you can't buy online. Let's say you have to buy through it's a complex sale, let's say, and there's not an online purchasing experience. So that's what I mean by B2B. So if a sale event happens offline, they're rewarding that kind of information, not just the digital activity.
I would even argue, like, defining what intent is for your organization is also important too. Because it could be a purchase, or it could just be information. Like, how many people visited the product information on, say, on new technology? That is also intent. So I think you have to think about it in the context of how, as an organization, am I served using this lens, and then against what properties do I believe are high intent signals? And it sometimes not a purchase. Purchase is like the last part of it. Hopefully everything that you're doing, you've identified, say, the right content pages or the right, avenues of informing individuals. That altogether is intent that may lead to a purchase.
Let's talk about.
Sorry, one last thing that just popped to mind, and I know Andrea would be super proud of me for saying this right now. You can also, and we don't do this enough, but we can also do and simply ask for feedback through surveys.
True.
Like, we don't do that often enough. But you're starting to see a lot more of this, either how did we do, the surveys that pop up. Sometimes it's like when you're leaving a page, a survey pops up. So I think that's important to also showcase in a way to kind of show intent, because you can be very, very specific. Did you find the information that you're looking for? Is it aiding you in the process of making a decision on a purchase? Like, you can be very prescriptive at what point of the decision journey where you kind of showcase. But surveying is also a great kind of a way to look at some of the intent signals.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Interesting, because you can almost define where somebody is in a buying journey by setting up, like, you'd have to create the experience, but you could set up a survey type of experience to help guide people through some kind of a purchase.
100%. When I think about it, for me, when I think about a buying journey in the context of an airline, it's very simple, right? You start with your search, your origin and destination. Then you you prompt them with all the different options that they have. Once they select, I want to leave at 8 a.m. and I want to come back 3 days later at 5 p.m. Then all of a sudden you start adding more of the add-ons,
Right.
Are you looking to pre-purchase your seat? Are you looking to buy Wi-Fi? Are you, all these little things. that buying journey is so concise. You can pick different moments in time to kind of prompt for either questions or kind of get an understanding. It's like, hey, where are people dropping off in this buying journey? Is it right when I'm asking them about all the ancillary products? Is it the ancillary products in the right place? Maybe, maybe not. Like, anyways, I think understanding and looking at your buying journey is also a great way to really kind of think about intent and then how they got to that point as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And things like upsell, cross-sell, it just made me think
all of it.
Yeah. Like the insurance part, renting a car, you need a room, all those kinds of things. Do you want, I think I've seen Airbnb maybe even do this, where there's like experiences you can add on to your stay. And
Airbnb is a great example of a simplified buying journey, but has a lot of different touch points, but they do it in a way that's just so seamless. I think it's a fantastic example. Because you can actually search by experience and then build an itinerary
around that experience.
Like it's it's not linear. Which I think is incredible.
Yeah, because it's almost starting with the idea of a bucket list. Yeah. And then building your trip around the bucket list, as opposed to starting with a location and then just trying to provide accommodation for the location. Well,
think about like, let's use an example, say the two of us. We want to go ride our bikes in Italy, for example, right? So we could find that on Airbnb, that experience of a bike tour in Italy. And then it's like, are you looking for accommodation? Yes. In and around the area here, it's already pre-populated, like spaces in and around where, say, that is happening. Right. So it's almost like a reverse search in a sense. But think about that intense signal that's coming in behind of that. Yeah. It's literally another data point that they can use, and now it's experiences, right?
Yeah,
it's incredibly powerful.
That's a really interesting point, because you kind of get focused on, especially in a scenario where, let's say you have a hotel room, you get very focused on the thing that you have to sell.
Yes.
Right? Like the widget, the
rooms,
whatever, the room, the airline seat, whatever.
Yeah. But
that's not necessarily what people want to buy.
Or what they're motivated to do that. Yeah.
Right. So that's where I think I imagine a lot of intent data can get muddy, because if you're just looking at the thing that you're trying to sell as opposed to what they're trying to buy, maybe it opens up a lot more opportunity. It might get a little bit more complicated.
Yeah.
But there's more opportunity to use different forms of data to build out a profile for and so I think that kind of goes back to to Andrew's point from way back when.
Yeah.
Really understanding a customer, because the old saying 100%. About they're not looking for a 1/4-inch bit, they're looking for a 1/4-inch hole.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that idea, right? Where you if you understand what the customer is trying to get to, then you can use different kinds of intent data to understand that process of what they're trying to achieve.
I love what you just said, because it just prompted something else in my mind around your organization's roles in the total buying journey, right? So I'm going to pick on airline again.
Yeah.
Airlines are simply a carrier, right? To experiences, to destinations, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the travel experience or the travel buying journey is a lot larger. People are getting prompted to go to destinations outside of visiting an airline. Usually the last thing that they're going to do is think about an airline and how they're going to get there. So now it's saying, okay, as an airline, what is my role in the buying journey to a destination? It's actually now almost like the last quarter of the process, which is like making it easy for them to find a seat, their origin destination, give it to them at the best price possible, etc. All too often, though, a lot of organizations think that they have a bigger part in that process, or they try to expand more and more their footprint. So again, when I think about my airline experience, we tried to create landing pages that were selling on the idea of destinations, and we'd have partners come in to kind of help bolster content, etc. The reality is we never got a lot of traffic to that because no one really thought about an airline website as
That way.
a
travel guide. So
the travel guide. It's an unnatural behavior that we're trying to force, until we started thinking about, well, where are they showing that intent? And that intent, that's when we started partnering with channels like Pinterest, where people were going for inspiration and then bringing the airline a little bit up closer to that buying journey. So you can't just manufacture this sometimes. You have to go where the intent is. So Pinterest, for example, was a great channel for us to really find a lot of that, even though if it was maybe 30 or 60 or 90 days before they would even think about a purchase, you're building that mental availability earlier in the buying journey.
Okay, so this is interesting, because this is where I think performance, like true performance marketing, like retargeting website visitor and optimizing for a conversion, meets branding. Because now you're talking about something a little bit further out in their journey, but still like within a 30, 60, 90 day period, probably, right? Where you're doing that off channel, like let's just keep using the airline industry.
Yeah.
You're doing that you're doing this research on the destination, not on how you're going to get there.
No.
So, but you're using intent on the destination, which is a phase of their process.
Yep.
Early in, like as they're doing the building of their plans and stuff, early in their vacation planning.
Yeah,
you're kind of inserting your brand there to be more recognizable, more remembered, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
So it's intent, but it's not on your site; it's on someone else's site. But it's still part of the near-term future plans that person has.
This is for me why I've become like there's this awakening. This is not a performance marketing tactic. This is a tactic that can be used for marketing in general. And it's just rethinking. And again, if we think about what Andrea was telling us, it's putting the consumer at the center of how you kind of think and strategize around that. I can't be everything to everybody as an airline industry. I have to accept that. It doesn't matter how many pages I look to kind of create a similar experience. People have their own behaviors that they show intent. Use those signals and build content strategies around that. And that's a big caveat to all this, and is the content that you're actually putting in those moments are crucial. So if you're not doing your research the right way, you're not understanding, say, the Pinterest and how people are actually engaging with content on Pinterest. Like we did a whole bunch of like those fun polls, this or that, like engaging content that I just couldn't repurpose a 300 by 600 and just slap it on there and say, hey, my job here is done. We worked closely at the time with the Pinterest team to make sure that we're creating engaging content that was natural. Sorry, it was listing natural behavior from the users that were engaging with it. Yeah.
So you talked a little bit before about search as an intentional, and maybe let's just kind of talk about Pinterest then as an intentional too, and maybe get into the channels, because context means a lot. Previously when you and I were building campaigns, we would work together on campaigns, and you would run things on, say, search or display ads. And I had Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Pinterest to some degree, things like that. So even though we're running the same campaign, the content had to be developed for the context or the channel that it was going on. Yeah. And so each channel in some way, it's not always so clear cut, but there's different channels that have different kinds of intent. So in this case with Pinterest, let's keep using that because I think it's a good story. People aren't necessarily searching for I need to buy a flight today, but they are looking for that inspiration. So it's a little bit further out in the near-term buyer journey. Yep. How do you think about channels in general in terms of intent?
Well, there's some channels that just naturally pop out as being like the ones that are like the winners. We talked about search engines. I would even argue social media is another great one. Email marketing, those channels in of themselves naturally are able to curate intent and better. we're talking about Pinterest, I would say that Pinterest is a very unique channel because it does two things. It uses image, and then it uses intent at the same time, like a typical search function, right? So you're being prompted and inspired by some amazing imagery to help make a decision or create your own pin board or whatever it is. And it's the marrying of those two things, which Google doesn't do in the same way, right? Google is just an extremely powerful search engine marketing tool where you're just writing your long tail keyword or short tail, whatever it is, you go in. But you're not being prompted with images. Yes, there's that selection for images if you're looking for images specifically, but the root of it is just like just a list of links, and I'm going to go to a web page. Pinterest, though, is prompting you with imagery, and we know from a lot of the data and research around how people are likely more inclined to click on imagery than text because it just it stimulates us a lot differently. So they have a unique opportunity because then you're looking at the intent of Honolulu, that's the search query, but now you're being inspired by all this amazing imagery around Honolulu or things that you can do in Honolulu. Then it's like, it's the images, right? And I think that's where, for me, Pinterest doesn't get enough looks from a lot of different organizations because we think that it's just an area where whatever they do, they just do in that channel, and then it doesn't translate to a typical. I don't want to say a typical buying journey because actually there's a lot of applications for it, but people have a hard time because there's not a lot of users, maybe in our generation, that use Pinterest that way.
Yeah, fair. Yeah. So is there, like, in Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram?
Oh, actually, LinkedIn's another great example.
Yeah.
You're right.
But a lot of those are feed based. I agree. I think Pinterest is interesting in terms of a channel. Search is straightforward, and it's not straightforward, but it's text based search primarily.
Yeah.
Voice becoming more and more, but more and more of a thing. But there's also 0-click searches, so you're avoiding actually having to click through on things.
Yeah.
But a lot of those other ones are feed based, and so it's almost like a push versus a pull channel. What I mean by Pinterest being interesting, and you touched on this too, is that it's both.
It's both.
It's a push and a pull at the same time, which is a really unique opportunity.
I don't know of another channel that does it that way. At least not one that comes to mind.
Yeah, maybe YouTube, kind of.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting, though.
There are limitations, though. Like when you think about using intent as a strategy, right? You talked about the idea, like, people are visiting websites sometimes when they're not actually have zero intent. It's just something piqued their interest. They're like, oh, I'm just going to have a peruse. And they may, and let's not forget, a lot of people use their add to cart function as just like a list of like things like, hey, yeah, maybe. It's not, it may be in that moment, it's like a nice to have. I'm just going to do this. So I'm saving it for later. Instead of actually using the save for later function on websites, they just add it to cart. Bots and fraud and ad fraud, it's still a thing.
Yeah,
it hasn't gone away. It's getting even more convoluted, if I'm being honest. But
well, and to that point, like, I know I get so much spam emails and phone calls because I'm
ridiculous
doing research on things that I have no interest in or in real legitimate intent in buying. A lot of these reports that I'm trying to find on B2B, whatever.
Yeah.
But the person on the other end doesn't know that. And so, like, I literally yesterday got 3 phone calls, and that was a light day for me, and because they're forcing me to put my phone number in. But all I want is the report. Like, I don't need a phone call. I really don't. I don't want it, and I'm blocking them all now, and I'm marking them as spam and all that kind of stuff, which is probably bad on their end. But they're interpreting my interest in the report as intent purchase.
Yeah.
And so then their SDRs and their sales team are just all over me but that's not at all my intent. It's one of those things like the report was there and now it's gone. And they're interpreting that as I want to buy.
I just want the report.
Yeah.
And there, a lot of organizations use things like that as a leads tactic, right? It's like, okay, so you showed interest in the report. You must be interested in what we're selling. Right. It's like, no, I just want to know how you guys got there. That's all. That's all I'm interested in.
Yeah. Yeah. So some of the other challenges with intent. So that would be one that we talked about. Misinterpreting signals. Talked about bots and ad fraud.
Yeah.
The data accuracy, I know, has its limitations in terms of on Zoom Info, you can pick any list you want, or G2 does this too.
Yeah.
You can pick any create criteria. You can download that information. Yeah. Get the companies that are actively buying. They use their own intent engines to say these people are active buyers, or these people are high intent purchasers, or they're at this stage in the funnel, various things like that. And so you download that information and download that data, and maybe 60% of it is accurate in terms of like an email that's legitimate.
Yeah.
And so there's always that kind of thing. That's not even interpreting their intent correctly. It's interpreting their contact information correctly. So there's some challenges there where, in some ways it's not as precise as we'd like it to believe. To believe it is.
No, it isn't. You're right. You're 100% right on that. And that's where, again, we briefly touched on the accuracy of data and the limitation on that. I think it's like 60 to 80%. It's it's not, you can't use it so, I don't want to say so, not primitively, but you can't just lean on that alone, right? And that's where it comes back to the idea is hey, anything you can do to augment a lot of your data sets with more information or more data, surveys, etc. That's when you can start building out a stronger picture of what actual intent looks like from where, and don't just look at one data source as being the source of truth, because that's when you run into problems.
Yeah. So let's talk about, you mentioned offline sources, POS. I don't know if you can talk about that or like to chat about that. I'm just curious about.
Yeah. An example?
Yeah, I've got one too, but I just kind of want to hear, because you've had different experiences than I've had.
Yeah, it's one, it's interesting, and it's not, well, actually, there's some POSs now. So I think I was at was it the Keg? I want to say 5 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And right after you're paying for it, on the POS, on the actual terminal, they have a rate us. So they have, how did we do today and whatnot. Now, you can obviously think about that now. That is now almost like the last touch point that they have with me as a consumer. Now I'm paying, I'm ready to walk out that door. So it's almost the last opportunity that they have to capture any sort of data information on how the experience was, things that they could do better. Obviously, it's very number based, so you're selecting from a drop down menu. But that is an example of kind of thinking about now another data layer in the point of in the context of point of sale. Now, when you think of a traditional point of sale, though, let's use our shared example of in the sports retailer world, the POS can serve as another data point, even though it is now after purchase. It's essentially information that can augment and tie back to, say, you have online behavior, like this consumer potentially did this, this, and this because they had a signed in state. Vduro's at amazing.com is signed in at, sportcheck.ca. Now we just also sent an email of the invoice to that account, right? So anything that I'm asking, even in that, can kind of go back and say, well, here's what we've identified as intent in these areas, and this happened 90 days ago or 120 days ago. You're able to start closing the loop a little bit. Again, the problem with that is it requires a signed in state, whereas I'm not signing in. Honestly, if I'm purchasing something, it's only to the point where now I'm purchasing, I may sign in. but I'm not browsing from a signed in state usually, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's another thing to kind of consider that's another limitation of really closing the loop. But just to close on the POS is a way to close the whole experience and understanding an intent signal that may have happened earlier, what actually happened at the end of it. So it's another reason why we kind of bring it up as a source or a data source.
Yeah.
What example did you have?
So one of the projects that I was involved in was the online to offline project that when Facebook was rolling that out. So you link up Facebook. I mean, there's a whole bunch of really smart technical people that did all this part, but you take purchase data from every individual, you put that into your data lake. Then you take your Facebook data and the exposure, you have to do a matching thing, put that in your data lake. Then you match your purchase data with the encrypted information from the Facebook data.
Right.
Then you get a matching rate. And then you can show your online exposure to ads to the offline purchase history.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's online to offline, I think was the project title. I don't know what the tool is actually called now, but
I wonder if it still exists that way.
Yeah. And it was something like, of all the people going through the cash register, something like 3 out of 10 people were willing to share their data with Facebook for that purpose. So it's a small subset of actual number of people that were sharing that information. But anyway, it's a subset.
Yep.
So to me, that's like an example of online to offline data. Where my head is going with this and how it can combine with some of the things we've talked about with, say, Jenny or Nicole, talking about the heavy versus light buyers.
Yeah.
So if you get that information over time, you accumulate data, and then you've got a database now of kind of heavy versus light buyers.
Right.
Because you can see people who are buying infrequently and people who are buying frequently. So in all probability, heavy buyers will remain heavy for a period of time, not forever, but for a period of time. Yeah. So that intent that you could create by just the frequency of purchase, whether it's a particular category of product or like in the case of retail, like we had all different kinds of sports. So maybe it's just hockey buyers, or maybe it's just like frequent purchasers at your store versus light purchasers. It could be that you could build out intent programs for both of those two different kinds of profiles of people.
Completely agree. But here, like you can kind of almost parse it in so many different ways. The biggest juggernaut to execution becomes content and your ability to scale that content based on intent. Because like I said earlier, you can define intent many different ways, but know that that's creating now a downstream effect on your content team. So everyone's there's different ideas of what intent is. We use an example for there's intent in a specific destination. Well, we talked about Pinterest and the content demands that they require as a channel. It's not a resizing of a campaign and trying to force it into the medium. So that's where it becomes, I would say almost like a marketer's Achilles heel. It comes down to the amount of content that they can create for any given campaign.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and the kind of content, talking about the context as well, the content that you're building is different. So it might be that the people who are the light buyers, it's more about their needs as opposed to the product or the discount or something like that.
Exactly.
Because they're, if they're buying infrequently, you just need to remind them of, we're here for the needs that you have in the future. Whereas the people who are heavy buyers, it might be that, hey, you bought like Bauer skates. Did you know that we also have Warrior hockey sticks or something like that? Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting because you can, even in that case, you can interpret intent based on the category. So if you play hockey, let's say, sticks is a thing you break, not irregularly.
Yeah.
God, they're like $200-300 now. So
they're insane.
That's expensive.
It's an expensive sport.
Yeah. but you can interpret like intent because of the particular category of buyer.
Yeah.
Right. Because if they're in, say, hockey and they break things at a regular frequency, say like a hockey stick, then you could use a category of purchase intent category based on a category.
Yeah.
You can create purchase intent based on a category of which they are.
Yeah. No, and that's where it becomes, again, dangerous, because how can you build all the different permutations of intent and having the right content for each instance? Because again, it's if you think about like let's use our retail background again. There's so many different products that you're offering. All of them have different ideas of intent.
Yeah.
I won't say there's nothing the same, but there's very different things. Like every product has its own idea. And I think that's where you need to make sure you have like, you're either isolating, hey, where's the, if you apply like the 80-20, where's the 20% of the products that potentially are providing, that 80% of revenue. And that's where we're kind of going to make sure that we're focusing on building out great experiences versus like, hey, let's just do it across everything. Because there's absolutely no way you will kill your marketing team if you try to do that. There's absolutely no way they can manage that kind of scale.
Yeah, at an extreme end, let's say you get into grocery.
Oh my God!
I think they might have like 60,000 SKUs.
It's
it's in that rate, like tens of thousands of SKUs for sure, depending on the size of the store. But I mean, there's no way you can meaningfully build, and you don't need to probably. And
you don't need to.
I think that's part of the thing when I balk at is that even a word? Yeah, balk, whatever. I get frustrated with the idea. I get frustrated with the idea of mass customization or mass personalization, because it's not about the like individual one person and one product. It's more about like a need. To my mind, is the personalization. If you understand the needs of a group of people, that's more productive for personalization than a particular product to a particular person.
I am so with you on that. And I've been guilty of this, of kind of really thinking about how do you kind of cater and create those personalized experiences. I would argue now it's less about the personalization of those experiences. It's more of the acknowledgement that, for example, there is a consumer that's thinking about a product or service in your thing, and you can do different things like surprise and delight. When I was working for, the Sporting Life group there in Golf Town, we actually added I don't remember how many orders we did, but it was like a little letter, and we had I think we offered some teas and something else. Just that was really no cost to us, maybe a little bit more incrementally those that were packaging the items. But it was just a surprise and delight, like, hey, thank you. That for me, people would call that's personalized. Well, we didn't personalize the letter. Like it was just a generic letter. It's like, hey, we thank you for your purchase. This is a little something to help get you kicked off in the year. That's more powerful than just making sure that you have a name on an email or really trying to create that personalized digital experience. Like it's less about that. And don't waste your time.
Yeah.
My opinion.
Yeah, I remember there was a project I did at Czech where there was like, okay, there's hockey buyers again. Yeah. There's people who bought one of 17 brands. We created this mass customization. To your point, it was a beast to push the creative through and get the creative team to build this. Running campaigns for this particular buyer, Bauer, hockey, Bauer, CCM, Tax, whatever, all the different brands that are out there, versus then we compared it to this one, which was just targeting hockey buyers with like a generic message. Like here's one image with like 5 different kinds of stick, skates, pants,
a little carousel,
shin pads, shoulder pads. And the individual one-to-one thing didn't perform as well. No. In terms of like your conversion rates, your cost per click, because you're taking a lot of data trying to guess. Yeah. And I think in retrospect now, knowing that, people are polygamously loyal to brands, it's probably not that productive.
No.
because they're not buying exclusively top to bottom one particular brand. You go to the gym and like people are wearing Adidas shoes, Nike shorts, and like a Lululemon top. It happens all the time.
Totally. And when you think, like, I love that example. What did we call it? The hockey. Oh my gosh. I remember because like, the ecom team on the other side trying to build that page. And I think some of it was external too, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
But just trying to build that functionality into that it was so messy. And if you remember, even at that time, some of our big campaigns, we were creating almost 300 different variations of the same content.
Yeah.
Like, just take a moment, think about that. How scalable is that actually for a lot of these organizations that, and I would say like at that time, fairly deep pockets for an organization, big production teams, content creation teams. There's not a lot of organizations that can really meet that scale. So that's where, again, like intent can become extremely powerful, but just make sure you're looking at the content that it best serves your organization.
Mm-hmm. There's another one that we had. I think this is just after you left, but there was an email campaign. So you know this all too well because you ran the email. But we would have categories of buyers: golf, hockey, athletic or leisure,
athleisure,
running, skiing, whatever.
Yeah.
And originally they were built on had they bought, period.
Yeah.
But didn't look at the time and the recency. And so then there was another project where we were trying to like create a different model to compare had they bought at any point in time. So if you had bought one point in the history because it was like a gift for your father on Father's Day, like you wanted a driver, versus anyone who bought recently and did they buy frequently within that category, and then what was the monetary value?
Yeah.
So the RFM model versus just had they bought, and so the intent, the performance you got out of the RFM model was way better than the intent you got out of, or the performance you got out of had they bought ever.
Right.
But isn't now, I would say, one is not necessarily better than the other. They're just one's better for like
that
getting people to buy today and showing higher ROAS.
Exactly.
But to your point about the Pinterest story, like you still want to reach those other people, and you can still use that historical data to build out a campaign and say, hey, maybe it's Father's Day again, and you can build a campaign around that. And that's part of your custom audience.
And this is for me where like the whole awakening, if you will, has come into play, is thinking about brand a different way, right? We talked about we've talked to Mary, almost every guest that we've kind of come on, we're talking about brand in some capacity. But at the end of the day, it's about building mental availability. And the only way you grow your pie is thinking at those larger campaigns or the higher reach campaigns. But you can do high reach with the lens of intent. And I think all too often we think about, brand marketing is like, just get it out there, right? But again, we have finite budgets. We live in a time where things are not as simple to getting budget for a lot of our activities. So you can still apply your lens of intent to those higher reach brand campaigns. I would still rather put the information in front of people that are still likely to want to engage with me anyways, to give me the best chance of showing a return on the other side. So intent is very versatile.
Totally. V, what did we learn today?
What did we learn?
This is good.
At the end of the day, my big thing is, and it's stop splitting performance marketing. Like it's marketing. It's one thing. Lean on your performance marketers and task them with some of these things that are likely bigger. Most performance marketers today have an idea about intent, understand intent, or they should be, if I'm being honest. But and asking them and task them to kind of use that same properties against things that are more traditionally outside of their scope. Don't just let them do the performance marketing or what is the industry's dubbed like a specific set of capabilities. I think you can get a lot of value by looking at something like intent for different programs, and that includes your brand campaigns. Like there is a purpose there that they can apply. So I think that for me is a big takeaway. The landscape's also changing; it's evolving. You know, we talked about we briefly touched on like ad blocking, cookieless experiences. Data is going to become essentially harder to come by. So you have to think about how you're going to augment and think of those different data options that you want to build in to build those pools of intent, right? And then finally is also thinking about, you know, the MarTech that's going to help you enable that the best of your ability, right? And sometimes you need to spend time. You may have to bring in people externally to kind of help advise against that, but have a very concrete idea of what it is that you're trying to achieve, and then do an assessment on what's your best ability to achieve that outcome. I just thought those are my.
Yeah, no, those are great. It's funny because when we first started talking, I was like, "Oh, intent is simple," and then as we're getting into like the execution, I'm like, "Wait, no, it's not simple." And I agree with all the points that you had. You know, there's I think there's kind of like that pharmaceutical story I had about, you know, the samples are gone. I think there's a risk in assuming that everything that happens that everything you can see is real and is the only thing that's happening. And so I think there's, you know, to the point of it's not an either or, it's both.
It's both.
You know, you do intent marketing, but you also got to do brand marketing.
Yes.
And it's like, it could be as simple as optimize for ROAS with half your budget, optimize for reach with the other half, or, you know, some variant thereof. Because I know there's you can, in B2B, let's say, it might be easier to see this, but there's a really high probability that if you have a pipeline of prospects and you're recording activity of those prospects, that if they're coming from a source that's not your website, they may have never visited your website.
Exactly.
So it's possible that you're missing out on a lot if you're just focused on the intent that you can see. So I think it's, to me, opportunity is to use, to your point, is using intent and training people who are performance marketers to think like brand marketers and vice versa, so that you're not missing on opportunity just because you can't see it in your own digital data.
I agree 100%. And
you look like you're excited.
I am excited. I am excited because think about the one thing we haven't even talked about is SEO, right? And the role SEO can have an intent. And SEO is probably the last thing organizations are thinking about, unfortunately, because it's not enough money. Do we get a headcount? Do we outsource? Whatever. But think about, like, if intent is coming through, say, things like search engine marketing, Pinterest, some of these other pages. Well, if we use Google as an example, the best way to rank for some of that stuff is organically. People are picking up, they know what's an ad and what's not an ad. So let's call a spade here. And there are also recognized what is organic listings. So if there's an area of intent that you've identified that is important for your organization, you better be spending time on the SEO side and making sure that you're ranking as high as possible for some of those product pages, content, whatever it is. You know, it's such an important part of it. Such an important part. And again, it's probably the last thing organizations are thinking about, unfortunately. Yeah.
Good conversation, V.
I actually thought we weren't going to make an hour, but here we are.
I feel like we could go for another hour.
There's so many. This was a great conversation. I'm happy we actually got around to doing this, and I hope listeners find this valuable information as they're, you know, challenging their marketing teams, or if you're a practitioner yourself, challenging the business to, you know, make you a part of some of these different conversations where you can continuously add value.
Yeah, totally. And if anybody, if you're listening and you have any questions that you'd like us to talk about or ideas you'd like to talk about, like, let us know, because we, you know, this is a survey. This is our intent survey. Let us know. Yeah.
No, this was great, man.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. Until next time, V.
Have a great day, man.
You too.
All right. Adieu.
Ciao.